the echo of a distant hymn, filtered through 100 meters of stone and old secrets, barely hinted at the sacred facade of Monastery Calidus. Down here, in the bowels of forgotten catacombs, faith had a different flavor. Less divine inspiration, more a cocktail of old dust and the metallic tang of ancient machinery. Typhon wiped a bead of sweat from his brow, leaving a smudge of grime behind. "Can you believe they used to call this place holy?" he muttered, prying loose another rusted panel with a crowbar that had seen better days. "Sure," Juno replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "If your definition of holy includes a side of decrepit tech and a sprinkle of impending doom." She was elbow-deep in a cavity she'd exposed in the wall, her fingers dancing over ancient circuitry like a pianist with a death wish. "I mean, it's practically a religious experience just being here," Typhon chuckled, the sound dry as the air, "in the I hope I don't get electrocuted kind of way." The lights flickered, bathing them momentarily in darkness before sputtering back into a sickly glow. It was as if the monastery itself was toying with them, one creaky power source at a time. "I swear this place has more in common with a haunted house than a sanctuary," Juno said, yanking her hand back hastily as something sparked. She shook her fingers, wincing. "And my fingers feel like they've been bit by 1,000 tiny, angry ghosts." Ah, the joys of archaeology. Who knew treasure hunting could be such a pain in the ass? Typhon mused, finally getting the panel free. Beneath it, a mess of wires and alien tech glimmered slightly, promising secrets and danger in equal measure. "This isn't treasure hunting," Juno corrected, reattaching a gadget that looked suspiciously like it had been cobbled together from leftover kitchen appliances and blind optimism. "This is more like rummaging through the universe's most dangerous garage sale." Typhon squatted beside her, fiddling with a box that looked like it might explode if someone so much as sneezed in its direction. "And the stakes are high, too. Who knew ancient aliens were so damn secretive about their home security systems?" Juno rolled her eyes, but there was a hint of a smile on her lips. "Probably because they knew jackasses like us would come snooping around, looking to make a quick buck off their leftovers." Suddenly, the ground beneath them shuddered, a deep rumble like a giant's stomach growling in discontent. Typhon gave Juno a quick glance. "Was that you?" Juno shook her head, her expression serious. "Nope, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't the cosmic pizza I had for lunch either." They both froze as the sound of grinding machinery filled the air, followed by a low, ominous hum. It seemed impossible that anything down here still worked, let alone had the audacity to sound threatening. "Maybe it's welcome music," Typhon suggested, though he didn't sound convinced even to himself. "Yeah, like a cosmic butler." "Welcome to Monastery Calidus. May we interest you in some artifacts with your impending doom," Juno quipped, standing up. She brushed the dust from her knees, though it seemed more a gesture of defiance than cleanliness. They followed the sound, threading their way through a labyrinth of corridors that seemed to coil tighter around them with every step. The air grew colder, biting at their exposed skin. It was enough to make you wonder if they were descending into hell instead of uncovering alien tech. At the end of the corridor, a door loomed. It was massive, its surface etched with symbols that seemed to shimmer slightly, as if they were alive. "Well, if this doesn't scream keep out in 1,000 alien languages, I don't know what does," Typhon remarked. "Think we should knock?" Juno asked, pulling a device from her belt that looked suspiciously like it had once been part of a toaster. "Be my guest," Typhon gestured grandly, stepping aside with a small bow. "Ladies first into the jaws of cosmic obliteration." Juno stepped forward, pressing the device to the door. There was a brief moment of silence, followed by a series of clicks and whirs. The door shuddered, then slowly began to open. Inside, the room was vast, filled with rows of what looked like metal caskets. Each one hummed with a low energy that set Typhon's teeth on edge. "Looks like we found the guest bedroom," he said. "Or the world's crappiest hotel," Juno added, peering into one of the caskets. Her eyes widened slightly as she took in the contents. "I think we just found the guests." Typhon joined her, his breath catching as he saw the figure inside, preserved in a state of suspended animation. It was humanoid but not quite human. Its features were sharp, alien, with an otherworldly grace that was as unsettling as it was fascinating. "Well, that's one ugly sleeper," Typhon commented, more to fill the silence than anything else. "Ugly maybe," Juno agreed, "but if these things wake up we'll have more problems than just a bad hair day." They moved deeper into the room, each casket revealing another of the alien figures in repose. "An army," Typhon mused, the weight of the discovery settling heavily on his shoulders. "An army that never got the chance to fight. Or maybe they fought and lost," Juno suggested, her tone thoughtful. "And now they wait for someone dumb enough to wake them up and give them a second chance." Typhon looked around, a grim smile on his lips. "Lucky us," he said, "we might just be those idiots." At the far end of the room stood a console, its surface covered in glyphs that pulsed with a faint, eerie light. "Think you can read it?" Typhon asked, nodding toward the console. Juno shrugged, already moving toward it. "If by read you mean poke at it until something happens, then yeah, absolutely." She began pressing the symbols, her fingers moving with a confidence she didn't quite feel. Each press elicited a different response, a hum here, a flicker of light there, as if she were playing a cosmic slot machine and hoping not to hit the jackpot. Suddenly, the room vibrated, a low thrum that resonated in their bones. Typhon glanced around, eyes wide. Juno, maybe quit while we're ahead." Juno hesitated, her finger hovering over the next symbol. "Ahead of what exactly?" she asked. Before Typhon could answer, the hum intensified, the air around them shimmering like a heat haze. One by one, the caskets began to glow, the figures inside seeming to come alive, their eyes flickering open with an unnatural light. "Ah, hell," Typhon muttered, taking a step back. "Looks like we've got company." Juno turned, her expression a mix of awe and horror. "I think we just woke the army." The alien figures stirred, their movements slow and deliberate as they adjusted to their new reality. They were taller than expected, their presence dominating the room, exuding an aura of barely contained power. "Think they're friendly?" Typhon asked, though the answer seemed obvious. Juno shook her head, dread curling in her stomach. "Friendly isn't exactly the vibe I'm getting." As if sensing their observers, one of the aliens turned its gaze toward them, its eyes glowing with a cold, calculating intelligence. It spoke, the sound a series of clicks and hisses that sent chills up Typhon's spine. "Great," he said, forcing a smile. "Alien charades, just what we needed." Juno snorted quietly, though her fingers twitched toward her sidearm. "If they start miming invasion, I'm out." The alien leader raised a hand, a gesture that spoke of command and control. The others responded immediately, falling into formation with a precision that was both impressive and terrifying. "So, any bright ideas?" Typhon asked, his voice tinged with desperation. Juno swallowed hard, her mind racing. "We get the hell out of here and hope they're not the vengeful type," Typhon nodded, already backing toward the door. "I can get behind that plan." They turned and ran, the sound of alien footsteps echoing behind them like the harbinger of doom, their only hope that the monastery's ancient walls would hold against whatever was now stirring within. As they reached the corridor, the lights flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to mock their flight. "Next time," Juno panted, glancing over her shoulder, "let's pick a monastery that doesn't come with its own apocalypse." Typhon laughed, a breathless, manic sound. "Where's the fun in that?" Behind them, the echoing footsteps grew louder, closer. And as the shadows closed in, they knew they'd have to rely on every ounce of human cunning and sheer bloody-mindedness to get out alive. The universe might have thrown them the deadliest curveball yet, but Typhon and Juno, they weren't the type to back down. "Come on," Typhon urged, determination lighting up his face. "Let's show these alien bastards what humans are made of." Juno grinned, her fear mingling with adrenaline. "Hope they like the taste of stubborn." And with that, they plunged deeper into the labyrinth, the promise of danger as familiar as the laughter of old friends. Typhon and Juno, now propelled by that universal motivator known as sheer terror, ran like they were being chased by a pack of lawyers. Only in this case the lawyers had glowing eyes, alien powers, and a penchant for army formation. As they bolted down the dimly lit corridors of Monastery Calidus, the echoes of their footsteps seemed to be racing right alongside them, mocking their frantic escape. "This isn't how I pictured my day going," Juno huffed, her lungs burning with each breath. "I thought maybe we'd find a nice vase or an ancient cookbook, not wake up the interstellar bogeyman." "Hey, look on the bright side," Typhon countered, his own breath ragged. "At least we know we're not the worst house guests they've ever had." Behind them, the unsettling click-clack of alien footsteps was drawing closer, a grim reminder that they weren't in the running for guests of the year either. Typhon skidded around a corner, narrowly avoiding a large, very inconveniently placed statue of some ancient monk who looked like he'd seen better millennia. "Next time, let's pick an adventure with less running and more treasure counting," he added. "Deal," Juno agreed, though she didn't sound convinced they'd live to see the next time. They dashed down another corridor, the lights flickering like they were having an existential crisis. Somewhere beneath the flickering, the monastery groaned, as if the very stones were protesting this rude awakening. Typhon half expected the walls to start closing in on them like some second-rate horror movie, but they held firm. For now. "Think we lost them?" Juno asked, glancing over her shoulder. The alien army hadn't exactly been subtle in their pursuit. Typhon shook his head, not slowing down. "We should be so lucky. They're probably organizing a committee to decide the best way to dismember us." As if to prove his point, a sound erupted from behind, a sort of metallic roar that reverberated through the stone corridors. "And there's the welcome committee now," Juno said, grimacing as she picked up the pace. They reached a junction and hesitated for the briefest moment, two paths stretching out before them like a cosmic choose-your-own-adventure. Unfortunately, both directions promised death by alien, with no refund for early departure. "Left," Typhon decided, his instincts for survival barely outpacing his instincts for sarcasm. "Because right is never right in situations like this." Juno followed, not bothering to argue. Arguing was for people with time on their hands, and currently they were on a tight schedule, one dictated by a countdown to doom. The corridor opened into another chamber, this one dominated by a massive holographic display that flickered into life, projecting something that resembled galactic conquest plans. "Oh great, more secret plans we don't understand," Juno muttered. "Perfect," Typhon replied. "Maybe it'll tell us how to make peace with our new bright-eyed friends." But as they quickly scanned it, something else caught their attention. A series of red dots blinked ominously across the holographic star map, each accompanied by symbolic representations that even they could decipher. Human factions, locked and loaded, all making a beeline for the monastery. "Looks like we're not the only ones who got an invitation," Juno said, crossing her arms. "And they're not here for the free minibar. Yeah, seems like everyone's eager to play who wants to be the next galactic overlord," Typhon quipped, eyeing the map with an uncomfortable mix of awe and horror. "And we're the uninvited guests who wandered in on the setup." Juno tapped a finger against the map, tracing the lines of approach with a grimace. "You know what this means, right?" she said. "It means we're about to be caught in the middle of a very unfriendly family reunion," Typhon answered, rubbing his temples. "And I left my party poppers in the other apocalypse." They both stared at the map, the red dots shifting like malignant stars across the galaxy's face. "This isn't just about finding the weapons," Juno said, her voice heavy with realization. "These factions. They're planning to use them against each other." "Of course they are," Typhon said, shaking his head. "Why share when you can just conquer?" The thought of these ancient weapons, locked away for who knows how long, being used to settle petty human squabbles made Typhon's stomach churn. But it was the thought of being stuck between those squabbling factions that really did the trick. They had to find a way to stop it, or at least slow it down. "Got any bright ideas?" Typhon asked, his voice tinged with the sort of desperation that usually accompanied last-minute cram sessions or impromptu karaoke nights. "I'm working on it," Juno replied, her fingers flying over the console as she tried to glean any useful information. "But if you've got a plan that doesn't involve us getting vaporized, I'm all ears." Back in the corridor, the sound of approaching aliens reminded them that time was a luxury they couldn't afford. "Maybe we can use the monastery against them," Typhon suggested, thinking out loud. "Old tech, ancient traps, anything that could slow them down." "Yeah, because booby traps worked so well for the last guys," Juno snorted, but there was a spark of interest in her eyes. "But maybe we can rig something together. You said it yourself. The place is like an ancient garage sale." That got Typhon thinking. Certainly, there was enough junk lying around to put MacGyver to shame. "All right," he said, nodding slowly. "Let's see what we can do." Juno flashed him a wry grin. "Who knew rummaging through cosmic leftovers would be our best shot at surviving the apocalypse?" Together, they scrambled back through the corridors, scavenging whatever bits and pieces they could find. Rusty panels, old circuitry, hopeful scraps of what might once have been useful. It was a mess, but it was their mess, and they were going to make it work or die trying. As they worked, they could hear the distant sounds of machinery waking up, as if the monastery itself was rising to the challenge. "This place really doesn't want us here," Typhon observed, yanking a wire free. "Join the club," Juno replied, her voice half lost in the depths of a console that looked like it hadn't seen daylight in centuries. The aliens drew closer, their footsteps now a relentless march of doom. But Typhon and Juno had a plan, or at least the beginning of one, and that was more than they could say about when they'd started this whole mess. "Ready?" Juno asked, looking up from their makeshift control panel, her face smudged with grease and determination. "Not even a little," Typhon replied, gripping his sidearm with a mix of trepidation and resolve. "But that's never stopped me before." With a single nod, they activated their contraption. The lights flickered, and for a brief moment, the entire monastery seemed to hold its breath. Then, in a series of whirs and clicks that sounded suspiciously like a giant clockwork beast, the ancient defenses came to life. Doors slammed shut, sealing corridors with the finality of a judge's gavel. Panels slid open to reveal hidden turrets, their barrels swiveling with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for dogs chasing cars. The sound of rushing air filled the chamber as ventilation systems kicked into overdrive, turning sections of the monastery into impromptu wind tunnels. "Looks like we woke up the old girl," Typhon said, a grim smile tugging at his lips. "Better than waking up to an alien invasion," Juno replied, her eyes on the consoles as she guided the defenses with all the delicate care of a conductor leading an orchestra of explosives. The sounds of confusion and redirected alien troops echoed back toward them, the usually disciplined march breaking into the chaos of beings caught in a trap. "I think it's working," Juno said, a hint of disbelief in her voice. "Yeah, but for how long?" Typhon countered, his eyes scanning the console for any sign of impending failure. "We need to get out of here before they figure it out and turn us into space dust." Juno nodded, her fingers flying over the controls as she set the systems to delay mode, buying them precious minutes. "All right, let's move." They turned to leave, their footsteps now a dance of urgency and hope. Behind them, the alien army struggled against the very walls that had once protected them, and Typhon couldn't help but feel a pang of irony. "Looks like they are not big fans of irony," he quipped. "Let's hope they don't get a chance to critique our work," Juno replied, her gaze focused on the path ahead. As they raced through the labyrinthine corridors, the monastery seemed to shift around them, as if guiding them towards something, or maybe just trying to confuse them to death. Either way, the ancient stones whispered secrets of a time long gone, and they couldn't shake the feeling that they were running through the pages of a history best left unread. "Where to now?" Typhon asked, their path stretching out into what looked like yet another identical corridor of doom. Up, Juno replied, and Typhon didn't argue. Up sounded good, up sounded hopeful, and hope, foolish and fragile, was all they had left. They reached a stairwell that spiraled upward, its steps worn by the passage of countless feet, human and otherwise. As they climbed, the air grew heavier with the promise of escape, or perhaps it was just the weight of the atmosphere finally getting to them. Either way, they pressed on, determination fueled by the knowledge that there was more at stake than just their lives. "Think we'll make it?" Typhon asked, his voice barely above a whisper as they paused for breath. Juno considered the question, her eyes searching his. "I think we've got a shot," she said, and it was enough. For now. They pushed forward, the steps disappearing beneath their feet like sands through an hourglass. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit had faded, replaced by the ominous hum of machinery settling into a new rhythm, a rhythm that spelled out danger in no uncertain terms. With one final push, they emerged into the chill of night, the stars above a cold, distant reminder of just how small and insignificant they were in the grand scheme of things. But in that moment, none of it mattered. They were alive, and as long as breath filled their lungs and fire ignited their spirits, they would keep fighting. "Next time," Juno said, her voice a blend of exhaustion and relief, "let's just go for drinks." Typhon laughed, his breath fogging in the night air. "Only if you're buying." And with that, they vanished into the night, leaving behind the echoes of ancient secrets and the promise of a future forged in defiance of the stars. Juno and Typhon sprinted through the winding corridors of Monastery Calidus like rats in a draining pipe, their lungs burning with the effort of not dying. The ancient stones seemed to mock them with every flicker of the lights overhead, which, for reasons unknown, decided to play disco just as things got dicey. "Got to love the ambience," Typhon panted, sparing a glance at Juno, who was fiddling with a device that had seen better millennia. "Really makes you feel like you're the main course before the apocalypse buffet." "Yeah, well, I'm not sticking around for dessert," Juno shot back, her fingers dancing over the controls like a caffeinated pianist. "I'm trying to shut down the security systems these aliens thought would be cute." Typhon grunted, scanning for any sign of their pursuers. If the galaxy was a schoolyard, the aliens would be those unsettling new kids with glowing eyes and a penchant for telekinesis. They didn't play fair, and they didn't like being told no. Not that Typhon was any good at following rules himself. "Hey, not to rush you or anything," he said, "but we've got company and they're not here for the bake sale." Juno groaned. "Give me a minute. This thing's older than your jokes, Typhon. You want it done faster, why don't you take a crack at it?" He let out a short laugh. "Last time I tried messing with alien tech, I ended up turning my own eyebrows into a cautionary tale." "Well, I hope you brought a backup pair," Juno replied, tugging at a wire that unhelpfully sparked at her. "Because I'm pretty sure we're about to meet some very unpleasant folks who don't believe in personal space." At that moment, the distant clatter of boots on stone reached their ears. Human mercenaries. Of course, nothing like a bunch of trigger-happy bounty hunters to spice up an already lethal game of cat and mouse. "You'd think they'd send a welcoming committee," Typhon said, his sarcasm dry enough to start a fire. "Maybe throw us a parade." "Only parade we're getting is with bullets as confetti," Juno muttered, her eyes focused on the console. "And I'm not in the mood to dance." The sound of a door sliding open behind them cut through the tension like a knife. They both turned to see a tall, imposing figure step through, clad in armor that had definitely seen more than one battlefield. Its glowing visor was fixed on them, the alien's intentions as clear as its hostility. "Great! Just what we needed," Typhon said, gripping his sidearm. "One more guest to the party." "I've got this," Juno said, her voice steady as she pressed a final button on the console. The lights around them flared and the air hummed with power as the alien systems flickered offline. "You're a genius," Typhon said, as the alien stumbled back, its tech momentarily fried. Yeah, well, I'm still working on getting us out of here alive, Juno replied, frowning at the panel. Give me a minute to reboot their security into something less lethal. Typhon nodded, his eyes darting around the corridor as the mercenaries closed in. He had always prided himself on being adaptable, but having both aliens and humans gunning for him was pushing it. You know, if we make it through this, I'm getting a t-shirt that says I survived Monastery Calidus and all I got was this lousy existential crisis. Juno snorted despite herself. Make sure it's in neon. I want it to match your mood. The sound of footsteps grew louder, punctuated by the sharp bark of orders. Typhon shot at the nearest mercenary, the shot ricocheting off armor before Juno cursed under her breath and yanked him down another corridor. Nice shooting, Tex, she said. Maybe next time aim for something less impervious like their egos. Funny, Typhon replied, following her lead. I was just thinking the same thing about your driving when we get out of here. The corridors twisted like an ancient maze, each turn feeling more like an educated guess. The monastery was a relic, and the alien tech hidden behind its decaying facade was not exactly user-friendly without a manual or a lifetime of experience in not blowing oneself up. Got any bright ideas? Typhon asked, eyes darting towards the darkened panels that lined the walls. Only one, Juno replied, pausing to catch her breath. I saw something back there, looked like an emergency override switch. It might give us an edge, but we're going to have to double back. Great, Typhon said sarcastically. Backtracking in a death trap. Just what I always wanted. Unless you've got a better plan, Juno challenged, raising an eyebrow. Typhon sighed. Fine, lead the way. They retraced their steps cautiously, avoiding the areas where the mercenaries had gathered. It was a delicate operation, like threading a needle while someone else set the room on fire. But they managed to get back to the console, and sure enough, Juno spotted the switch she'd seen before. Here goes nothing, she muttered, flipping it. Immediately, a low rumble shook the stone, followed by the unmistakable sound of the alien systems rebooting. But this time, Juno had managed to jury-rig them into a more cooperative state. Panels opened to reveal alien drones, their usual hostility now redirected thanks to Juno's quick thinking. The mercenaries who had been closing in found themselves under attack, the drone's energy blasts sending them scrambling for cover. That's my girl, Typhon said, watching the chaos with satisfaction. Don't get too comfortable, Juno warned. It's only a matter of time before they figure out how to override it. Then let's not stick around to see how it ends, Typhon agreed, ushering her forward. They made their way through the corridors at a brisk pace, the sound of alien drones doing their work a comforting backdrop. But as they turned the corner, they came face to face with a mercenary who'd somehow bypassed the chaos. The mercenary raised his weapon, a cruel smile playing across his lips. End of the line, folks. Typhon and Juno exchanged glances, then Juno stepped forward, her hands up. Look, we're not interested in your fight, the mercenary chuckled. Too late for diplomacy, sweetheart. He leveled his gun, but before he could fire, a drone swooped down, blasting him aside with an energy bolt. That was close, Juno said, her voice shaky with adrenaline. Typhon nodded, offering her a grin. Knew you'd come up with something. Don't start thanking me yet, Juno replied, urging him on. We've still got to get out of here. They finally reached the outer doors, the cold night air a welcome contrast to the stifling atmosphere inside the monastery. But as they paused to catch their breath, a familiar humming caught their attention. Looks like someone doesn't want us to leave, Typhon said, pointing at the alien craft hovering above. Great, Juno said. Just when I thought I'd had enough excitement for one lifetime, the craft descended, its occupants clearly not interested in letting them escape. But before Typhon could think of a plan, Juno pulled out a small device she'd pocketed earlier. What's that? He asked, eyeing it suspiciously. A little surprise I whipped up, Juno replied, tossing it towards the craft. The device exploded in a shower of sparks, sending the craft spiraling out of control. It crashed nearby, the resulting fireball a testament to Juno's ingenuity. "Remind me not to get on your bad side," Typhon said, genuinely impressed. Juno shrugged. "Just part of the service." Together they made their way through the forest that bordered the monastery, the sound of pursuing footsteps growing fainter with each step. For the first time in what felt like forever, hope glimmered on the horizon. "Think we'll make it?" Typhon asked, glancing at Juno. She smirked. "If we don't, I'm gonna haunt you just so I can say I told you so." He laughed, the sound raw and real. "I'll look forward to it." As they disappeared into the night, the stars above winked down like the knowing eyes of a universe that thrived on chaos and irony. But for Typhon and Juno, it was just another day in the endless struggle for survival. And maybe, just maybe, they'd live to see the dawn. "Next time, no ancient monasteries," Typhon said, his voice barely a whisper. Juno nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Yeah, maybe somewhere with a beach. And a bar," Typhon added, the hint of a smile on his lips. "Deal," Juno agreed, taking his hand as they continued their journey into the unknown. The universe has a funny way of kicking you in the teeth just when you think you've figured out the score. Typhon and Juno had barely escaped Monastery Calidus with their hides intact, only to stumble upon a revelation that threatened to chew them up and spit them right back out. They stood in a clearing, minding their own business, when the very ground beneath them started doing impressions of a dizzy drunk. Typhon glanced at Juno, who was fiddling with an alien artifact they'd snatched up during their chaotic retreat. "You sure you didn't skip the manual on that thing? Because I'm pretty sure the ground isn't supposed to have a pulse." Juno shot him a look that could melt glass. "You want to give it a shot, mister? I can barely handle my own eyebrows." "Point taken," Typhon replied, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "Though for the record, I prefer my existential crises without the added bonus of tectonic temper tantrums." Their banter was cut short as the artifact emitted a low hum, sending shivers up their spines. It was an innocuous-looking thing, resembling a chunk of rock with a touch of techno-sorcery, but the vibes it was giving off made Typhon feel like he'd just swallowed a live wire. "So what does that paperweight actually do?" Typhon asked, eyeing it like it might bite. Juno paused, her fingers tracing the alien markings etched into its surface. "Best guess, reality manipulation." "Reality manipulation," Typhon snorted. "What are we talking here? Bending spoons or rewriting the laws of physics?" "More like creating a to-do list for the universe and making it listen," Juno said, her voice tinged with awe. Typhon let out a low whistle. "And here I thought my ex was the only one who could alter reality with a single glance." Juno chuckled despite herself, but her expression grew serious as she continued to study the artifact. "It's no wonder everyone and their mother is after this thing. It's a game changer, Typhon. Whoever controls it could reshape entire worlds or destroy them." "Ah, yes," Typhon said dryly. "The usual absolute power corrupts absolutely sh-stick." Juno nodded. "And given our track record, I can't say I trust anyone else with it either." Their brief moment of levity vanished as the forest around them came alive with the sound of approaching footsteps. Typhon cursed under his breath. They'd barely had a chance to catch their breath, and it seemed the universe was already dealing them another losing hand. "Looks like the welcoming committee followed us," Typhon remarked, drawing his sidearm. Juno tucked the artifact into her satchel and readied her own weapon. "Think they are here for tea and crumpets?" "More like guns and grenades," Typhon replied, scanning the tree line. Before they could exchange further pleasantries, a group of mercenaries emerged from the shadows, their weapons drawn and expressions set on death glare. They didn't look like they'd come to negotiate. "End of the line, folks," one of them barked, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. "Hand over the artifact and maybe we'll let you limp away." Typhon raised an eyebrow. "Generous offer, but I've got this thing about not negotiating with anyone who looks like they'd eat their own mother for breakfast." The mercenary chuckled. "Suit yourself. Just makes my job easier." In the blink of an eye, chaos erupted. Bullets zipped through the air, each one a deadly punctuation mark in the conversation. Typhon and Juno ducked behind trees, returning fire as best they could. It was like a deadly game of whack-a-mole, except the moles had military-grade hardware and zero sense of humor. "Any bright ideas?" Typhon shouted over the din, his mind racing for a way out. "One," Juno replied. "We need to use the artifact." Typhon hesitated. "You sure? Last time you flipped that switch, the ground nearly had a seizure." "We don't have a choice," Juno said, her voice steady despite the chaos. "It's either this or we end up as a cautionary tale." With a reluctant nod, Typhon covered Juno as she pulled out the artifact, her fingers dancing over its surface like it was the world's most dangerous game of Simon Says. The hum returned, louder and more insistent, as if the artifact was waking up from a long nap and wasn't happy about it. As Juno concentrated, reality itself seemed to shimmer around them. The air grew thick, charged with an energy that made Typhon's skin crawl. Then, without warning, the artifact released a wave of power, rippling outwards like a stone thrown into a pond. The effect was immediate and disorienting. The mercenaries froze mid-action, their bodies suspended in time like marionettes with their strings cut. Trees twisted and warped, their shapes bending like the universe had decided to try its hand at abstract art. Typhon gaped at the scene, slack-jawed. "Well, that's new." Juno didn't reply, her concentration focused entirely on maintaining control. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and Typhon could see the strain etched into her features. He reached for her, alarmed. "Juno, you okay?" "I'm fine," she said through gritted teeth. "Just keep an eye on our friends here." Typhon nodded, his eyes flicking back to the mercenaries. They were stuck in place, trapped in the liminal space between moments. It was like someone had hit pause on the universe's most violent DVD. Juno's grip on the artifact tightened, and slowly she began to ease the pressure. The surreal landscape around them shifted again, returning to something resembling normality. The mercenaries dropped to the ground, disoriented and confused, their weapons clattering uselessly at their sides. Typhon wasted no time, moving in to disarm them while they were still reeling from the assault on their senses. Juno slumped against a tree, her breath coming in ragged gasps as the artifact finally fell silent. "Remind me never to question your improvisational skills again," Typhon said, offering her a hand. She took it, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Just another day in paradise, huh?" "If paradise is synonymous with nearly getting your head blown off, then absolutely," Typhon replied. "Now let's get out of here before they decide to hit rewind." They moved quickly, leaving the dazed mercenaries behind as they plunged deeper into the forest. The artifact had bought them time, but they both knew it was a temporary reprieve. There would be others, each more desperate and dangerous than the last. As they trudged through the underbrush, Juno glanced at Typhon. "How long do you think we can keep this up?" Typhon shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "Long enough to find a solution or die trying. I'm partial to the former, by the way." Juno laughed softly, shaking her head. "And here I thought you were just in it for the thrill." "Believe me, I'd settle for a quiet life and a strong drink right about now," Typhon said, checking their surroundings for any unwanted company. "Must be my lucky day," Juno replied, "because I'm carrying just enough to get us both to the next crisis point without dying of boredom." They pushed onward, the forest gradually thinning out to reveal a sprawling vista of rugged terrain. The stars above twinkled with a cold, indifferent light, as if mocking their struggle. Typhon paused at the edge of a ravine, surveying their path with a critical eye. "Think we could sell the artifact to the highest bidder and retire on some backwater planet with decent weather?" Juno considered it for a moment, then shook her head. "Tempting, but it feels like handing a loaded gun to a toddler. And besides, I've got a reputation to uphold." "Ah yes, the famous not dying horribly reputation," Typhon quipped. "It's a tough one to beat." "Exactly," Juno replied, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "So, what's next?" Typhon leaned against a rock, contemplating their options. We find out who's really pulling the strings and why this thing is so important. And maybe, just maybe, we use it to turn the tables. Juno nodded, her expression resolute. Sounds like a plan, but first we need to find somewhere safe to regroup. Safe? In this universe? Typhon laughed, shaking his head. You're dreaming, but I'm game if you are. Together they made their way down the ravine, the alien artifact nestled securely in Juno's satchel. It was a ticking time bomb, a wild card in a deck that was stacked against them. But despite the odds, they pressed on, driven by a determination that refused to be snuffed out. The night was silent save for the crunch of gravel underfoot and the distant cries of nocturnal creatures. Typhon and Juno moved with purpose, their pace steady as they traversed the rocky terrain. The world around them was vast and uncaring, but in their shared resolve they found a flicker of hope. Think we'll find answers out here? Juno asked, breaking the silence. If not answers, then at least more questions, Typhon replied with a smirk, because the universe just loves a good cliffhanger. Juno chuckled, nudging him with her shoulder. You're a real optimist, you know that. Comes with the territory, Typhon said, his tone light despite the gravity of their situation. Besides, if we can't laugh at the absurdity of it all, what else is there? True enough, Juno agreed, her gaze fixed on the path ahead. Let's just hope the universe doesn't decide to throw us another curveball anytime soon. But where's the fun in that? Typhon replied, grinning. And so they continued, two figures against the backdrop of a galaxy that thrived on chaos and uncertainty. As the first light of dawn began to paint the horizon, they pressed on, each step a testament to their defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. Together, they would face whatever came next, whether it be the dawn of a new beginning or the final chapter in a story that refused to end quietly. For Typhon and Juno, the journey was far from over, and the universe had yet to reveal all its secrets. The forest cleared, but only to present a series of problems that would make even a masochist reconsider their life choices. In the clearing stood the lab, a testament to humanity's stubborn refusal to leave well enough alone, or, as Typhon liked to call it, a bad idea wrapped in a death wish. Juno glanced at the building, her lips twisting into a grimace. Of all the places to find an antique alien artifact, it had to be here. The universe is committing to the bit, I'll give it that. Yeah, and we're the punchline, Typhon muttered, his gaze darting around for any signs of unwelcome company. So far, the coast was clear, but with their luck, that wouldn't last. They approached the lab cautiously, like it was a sleeping bear they'd been tasked with poking awake. The air was tense, thick with the promise of betrayal and impending doom. Typhon could feel it in his bones, and judging by Juno's expression, so could she. You know, Juno said, breaking the silence as they crept forward, I've been thinking. Always dangerous. She shot him a look. In all seriousness, what if we just run? Sell the damn thing to someone else's problem. Typhon sighed, shaking his head. And end up on some intergalactic watch list for reckless endangerment. No thanks. I've already got enough on my permanent record. They reached the lab's entrance, the door hanging slightly ajar in a manner that was about as reassuring as a clown at a funeral. Typhon motioned for Juno to stay back as he pushed it open, the rusty hinges squealing in protest. Inside was a scene straight out of a sci-fi horror flick, flickering lights, ancient machinery, and the pervasive smell of ozone. It was the kind of place that practically screamed, something's going to jump out at you. Typhon's grip tightened on his sidearm, his nerves singing like a too-tight guitar string. Cozy, Juno whispered as she followed him in, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Yeah, if you're into that whole abandoned chamber of mad science vibe. They moved through the dimly lit corridors, every sound magnified in the oppressive silence. The air was charged, heavy with the weight of untapped potential and the grim reality that they were in way over their heads. It was enough to make Typhon wonder if maybe, just maybe, they'd bitten off more than they could chew. Remind me again why we thought this was a good idea, he asked, ducking under a low-hanging pipe. Juno snorted softly. Because we're idiots with a death wish. Ah, right. How could I forget? They reached what appeared to be the main lab, a cavernous room filled with consoles, wires, and blinking lights. At its center lay the prize everyone was gunning for, the alien tech, looking as innocuous as a toaster but packing the punch of a nuclear bomb. "Looks like the universe's most dangerous paperweight," Typhon said, eyeing it warily. Juno stepped forward, the artifact in her hand glowing faintly in response. "Well, let's just hope it comes with an instruction manual." Before either of them could make a move, a voice cut through the gloom, smooth as oil on water. "I see you found it." Typhon spun around, weapon raised. A figure emerged from the shadows, hands in the air like they were posing for a mug shot. It was someone Typhon recognized, a face he'd hoped to never see again. "Reese," he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Should have figured a snake like you would slither back into the picture." Reese grinned, all teeth and no warmth. "Come on, Typhon, is that any way to greet an old friend? Friend, you sold me out to the Calidus freaks, you bastard." Reese shrugged, unbothered. "Business is business, you know how it is." Juno leveled her gaze at Reese, unimpressed. "And what kind of business are you running now exactly?" "The kind that wants that artifact," Reese replied, nodding towards the glowing rock in Juno's grip. "Hand it over and maybe you'll walk out of here." Typhon laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Oh sure, because trusting you worked out so well last time." Reese sighed, as if dealing with unruly children. "You don't really have a choice. My employer has a vested interest in that thing, and let's just say they're not big on taking no for an answer." "Yeah, well, I've got an employer too," Typhon retorted. "Me, myself, and I." Reese rolled his eyes. "Always the wise ass. Look, just give me the artifact, and we can all go back to whatever it is we were pretending to do." Typhon glanced at Juno. Their silent communication honed through countless close calls and near misses. The odds weren't great, but they'd faced worse. "How about you take a hike, Reese?" Juno said, her voice hard as the stone in her hand. "Before we make you." Reese chuckled, a sound that set Typhon's teeth on edge. "Suit yourselves, but don't say I didn't warn you." He snapped his fingers and chaos erupted. Mercenaries swarmed in from every entrance, weapons drawn and ready to make them a footnote in the annals of the universe's many pointless deaths. "Well, this escalated quickly," Typhon muttered, ducking behind a console as bullets peppered their surroundings. Juno crouched beside him, her expression grim. "Any more brilliant ideas?" "Working on it," Typhon replied, weighing their options or lack thereof. The situation was bad. No, scratch that. It was a shitstorm of epic proportions. But in the midst of the chaos, a plan began to form. A plan that was either going to get them out alive or get them killed in the most spectacularly stupid way possible. "Juno," he said, keeping his voice low, "you ever play dead man's bluff?" She raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like a terrible idea." "Yeah, but it's the only one we've got. Trust me." Juno hesitated, then nodded. "Like I have a choice." "That's the spirit." Typhon leaned out, firing a few shots to keep the mercenaries at bay while Juno fiddled with the artifact. The hum returned, more menacing than before, as energy crackled around them, making the air taste of metal and bad decisions. "Here goes nothing," Juno said, triggering the artifact's power. The effect was instant and disorienting. Reality warped, twisted, and then realigned itself with a snap that rattled Typhon's bones. The mercenaries froze, caught in the artifact's temporal grip, their weapons suspended mid-fire. "Now's our chance," Typhon said, urgency in his voice. They bolted, weaving through the stalled figures like a bizarre game of freeze tag. The exit loomed ahead, a beacon of relative safety in a world gone mad. Just as they reached it, Reese's voice cut through the haze, laced with frustration and rage. "You can't run forever, Typhon. We'll find you, and when we do." Typhon didn't stick around to hear the rest. Instead, he grabbed Juno's hand and pulled her through the door, into the cold, indifferent night. They ran without looking back, the forest swallowing them like a reluctant protector. The artifact's power faded, but its mark lingered in the air, a promise of further complications down the line. "That was close," Juno panted, slowing to a jog as they put distance between themselves and the lab. Too close, Typhon agreed, keeping his eyes peeled for any signs of pursuit. Reese won't let this go. Neither will his employer. Then we need a plan, Juno said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. Working on it, Typhon replied. Step 1, don't die. Solid start, Juno said with a wry smile. They paused at the edge of a small clearing, their breath visible in the frigid air. The stars above twinkled with a malicious kind of humor, as if the universe was laughing at their predicament. Think we'll ever catch a break? Juno asked, her tone half joking, half serious. Probably not, Typhon replied, scanning the horizon. But until then, it's us against the universe, and I've got a feeling we're just stubborn enough to make it work. Juno nodded, her resolve hardening with each beat of her heart. Then let's make sure we do. For as long as we can. They set off once more, two rebels with a cause that the universe itself seemed invested in thwarting. But they were still breathing, still fighting, and as long as that remained true, they were far from defeated. As they disappeared into the night, the lab stood silent and empty behind them, a monument to ambitions both glorious and damned. It was a reminder that in a galaxy full of shadows, the only thing you could truly count on was yourself. And maybe, if you were lucky, one other person crazy enough to stick by you through thick and thin. The dawn was still a ways off, but they moved forward with the knowledge that, whatever came next, they'd face it together. After all, if you couldn't laugh in the face of oblivion, what else was there? Typhon and Juno stumbled into a hollowed-out cave that kindly agreed to serve as their temporary hideout. The air was damp and smelled like a wet sock that had been left in the back of a spaceship's cargo hold for too long. They collapsed onto the rocky floor, catching their breath. So, what's step 2 in your brilliant plan? Juno asked, sarcasm ladling each word. She flicked a piece of debris off her boot, as if daring the universe to throw something else at them. Step 2. I just came up with step 1 on the fly. I thought we'd have more time before needing to graduate to step 2, Typhon replied, massaging his temples like a fortune teller trying to divine the future but only seeing a migraine. Juno rolled her eyes. Great. We're fugitives with a half-assed plan. Fantastic, Typhon shrugged, a gesture that seemed to say, what else is new? He pulled out a compact device from his jacket, the kind that screamed classified and don't touch in equal measure. We need to get the factions to fight each other over the artifact, he suggested, as though it was the most reasonable thing in the universe. Juno leaned back against the cave wall, trying to ignore its unsettling warmth. And how exactly do you plan to do that? Send them all an invite to a party in the woods and hope they bring their guns? Close, Typhon said with a grin that was more reckless than reassuring. We leak the location of the artifact. Let them come to us, or rather to where we want them to be. And where's that? The remains of Monastery Calidus, Typhon replied, his voice carrying the weight of bad decisions yet to be made. It's the only place with enough traps and misdirection to keep them busy while we slip away. Juno's eyes narrowed. You want to go back there? Because it was such a pleasant vacation spot the first time around. Think of it as a return policy, Typhon quipped. We left something behind, and now it's time to give it back in pieces, preferably. She huffed, her breath visible in the chilly air. Fine, but if this goes wrong, and it will, I'm blaming you. Wouldn't have it any other way, Typhon replied with a mock bow. Juno looked at him, weighing his words like a merchant appraising suspect goods. All right, what's our next step? Typhon considered their options, or lack thereof. First, we need a distraction, something big and loud. Like Reese's ego. Exactly, Typhon said, smirking. But let's see if we can get something a little more combustible. Juno reached for a small sack at her side, rummaging through its contents like a kid rifling through a cereal box for a toy. She produced a couple of old grenades and some questionable-looking explosives. Will these do? Typhon eyed the sack with a mix of admiration and terror. Where did you get those? A lady never tells, Juno replied, her grin as sharp as a razor's edge. Well, color me impressed, Typhon said, genuinely so. Now we just need to set the stage. They spent the next couple of hours repurposing their hideout into a poorly rigged trap full of explosive surprises. The plan was simple, really. Create enough chaos to make even the most hardened mercenaries reconsider their life choices. Think it'll work? Juno asked as she balanced a grenade on a ledge like a precarious ornament. Doesn't matter if it works, Typhon replied, fastening wires with the precision of someone simultaneously skilled and careless. It just needs to look like it'll work. Kind of like us, Juno snorted. That sounds about right. With the traps in place and the sun setting like a disillusioned retiree, they knew it was time to get moving. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath, as if anticipating the spectacle about to unfold. Let's move, Typhon said, nodding toward the distant silhouette of Monastery Calidus. We've got a show to put on and the audience is eager. Any chance they'll applaud? Juno asked, adjusting her pack. Only if we screw up and blow ourselves up. Then they'll be clapping all the way to our graves. They set off, moving swiftly and silently through the forest. The darkness was an old friend, and they navigated it with the ease of those who had danced with danger once too often. As they neared the monastery, Typhon couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig seemed charged with intent. Feels like déjà vu, he muttered. Juno nodded. Yeah, let's hope it's not déjà vu all over again. They reached the outskirts of the monastery, which loomed like a haunted memory. The flickering lights and groaning stones had not lost their charm, and the oppressive atmosphere was as welcoming as a tax audit. Think they'll fall for it? Juno asked, peering into the gloom. Only one way to find out, Typhon replied, raising a device that would broadcast their location to any scavenger or mercenary worth their salt. He pressed a button, and the signal was sent. Within minutes, they could hear the distant rumble of engines and the unmistakable hum of bad intentions on the wind. Showtime, Juno said, her voice a mix of anticipation and dread. They retreated to a vantage point with a clear view of the monastery's entrance. Soon enough, the first group arrived, a motley crew of cutthroats and opportunists, drawn by the promise of profit and mayhem. Let's get this party started, Typhon whispered, triggering the first of their traps. The explosion was glorious, a cacophony of chaos that sent debris skyward like confetti at a particularly violent parade. The mercenaries scattered, disoriented and panicked. Think they'll have second thoughts? Juno asked, watching the chaos unfold with a grim satisfaction. Depends on how much they're getting paid, Typhon replied. But we've got a few more surprises in store. They watched as the next wave of mercenaries arrived, only to be met with more explosions and booby traps. The factions began to turn on each other, confusion and paranoia doing their dirty work for them. Looks like they're doing a fine job of thinning their own ranks, Juno observed, her tone one of dark amusement. Yeah, it's almost like they don't trust each other, Typhon said, shaking his head. Who could have guessed? As the factions continued to tear each other apart, Typhon and Juno knew it was time to make their exit. The chaos they had sown was enough to cover their retreat, and they slipped away like shadows in the night. Where to now? Juno asked as they put distance between themselves and the carnage. Anywhere that's not here, Typhon replied. But first we need to regroup and figure out our next move. Juno nodded, her expression thoughtful. Any bright ideas? Typhon hesitated, then grinned. Maybe it's time we stop running and start making some calls. Risky, Juno said, her voice tinged with skepticism. Yeah, but we're running out of options, Typhon replied. And I figure it's time to remind some people that we're still in the game. They found a secluded spot, far from the chaos they'd orchestrated. Typhon pulled out an old communicator, one he hadn't used in years. It was dusty and temperamental, much like its owner. Who are you calling? Juno asked, curiosity piqued. An unexpected ally, Typhon said, dialing a number that felt like a gamble. Someone who owes me a favor, Juno raised an eyebrow. I didn't know you had any friends. Neither did I, Typhon replied with a wry smile. But desperate times call for desperate measures. The communicator crackled to life and a voice answered, low and guarded. "Who is this?" "It's Typhon," he said, keeping his tone casual. "I need a favor." There was a pause, followed by a chuckle that was equal parts amusement and disbelief. "Typhon, you son of a bitch, what mess have you gotten yourself into this time?" "The usual kind," Typhon replied. "But I've got something that might interest you." "I'm listening." Typhon explained the situation, highlighting the artifact and the chaos surrounding it. He could almost feel the intrigue on the other end of the line. "All right," the voice said, a hint of interest creeping in. "Consider me intrigued. I'll see what I can do." "Thanks," Typhon said, relief mingling with cautious optimism. "I'll owe you one." "Damn right you will," the voice replied before the line went dead. "Well?" Juno asked, watching him with a mixture of anticipation and skepticism. "Looks like we've got a new player in the game," Typhon said, pocketing the communicator. "Let's just hope they play nice. Or at least nicer than Reese," Juno said, her sarcasm a familiar balm for frayed nerves. Typhon nodded, his mind already working through the possibilities. The path ahead was as uncertain as ever, but they weren't alone anymore. And in a universe that seemed determined to chew them up and spit them out, that was something. They set off once more, their steps lighter and their resolve steeled by the knowledge that they still had cards to play. The stars above continued their indifferent watch, but Typhon and Juno moved with a sense of purpose, ready to face whatever came next. "Think maybe we'll catch a break this time?" Juno asked, her voice a mix of hope and resignation. "Probably not," Typhon replied with a grin. "But as long as we're still breathing, we've got a chance." With that, they disappeared into the night, two defiant spirits in a galaxy that had yet to break them. The future was uncertain, but they were ready to meet it with all the cunning, sarcasm, and grit they had left. And if they had to laugh in the face of oblivion, well, so be it. Typhon and Juno huddled in the cave with the kind of anticipation usually reserved for a trip to the dentist or a tax audit. The darkened interior was filled with the hum of technology only half understood, the alien artifact sitting on a makeshift table like a particularly ominous paperweight. "The thing about ancient alien tech," Typhon began, fiddling with the compact device in his hands, "is that it's a bit like dating. Looks promising at first, but before you know it, you're being zapped by cosmic rays or, in this case, hunted by intergalactic bounty hunters." Juno snorted, her laugh echoing through the cave like a dry cough in a silent room. "And here I thought we were just going for a nice stroll through the galaxy. Surprise." "It's never just a stroll," Typhon said, eyes gleaming with a mix of mischief and madness. "Now, let's see if we can convince this artifact to play nice before it decides to rearrange reality again. Got a plan?" Juno asked, raising an eyebrow. "More like a vague hope," Typhon replied, tapping the device against his palm like one might threaten a stubborn television remote. "But hey, if wishful thinking were a crime, we'd be on death row." Juno glanced at the artifact, the flickering lights of the cave casting erratic shadows across its surface. "Just remember, if it starts glowing ominously or talking back, we run." "Agreed." "I'm not in the mood for any cosmic conversations today." They worked in silence, a tense camaraderie born of shared danger and mutual cynicism. Typhon's fingers moved with surprising dexterity, connecting wires and flipping switches in an arcane dance of desperation and genius. "Okay," he said finally, stepping back like an artist appraising a particularly baffling piece of modern art. "I think I've managed to disable the artifact's worst bits. It shouldn't, explode or summon an eldritch horror." Probably, Juno echoed, the word heavy with skepticism. "That's reassuring. Think of it this way," Typhon said, grinning. "If it goes wrong, we'll be too dead to care." "Silver linings," Juno replied dryly. With the artifact temporarily pacified, they turned their attention to the outside world, a world currently embroiled in chaos thanks to their earlier handiwork. "You think they've realized yet?" Juno asked, peering out into the night. "That they're being played like a cheap harmonica, Probably not, Typhon said, but they will soon enough. Time for us to make our move. Juno nodded, donning her pack with the air of someone gearing up for yet another unwanted adventure. What's the play? We head to Monastery Calidus, Typhon said, a plan forming as he spoke. With the artifact disabled, we've got leverage. We can force those factions to the negotiation table. Juno blinked, then broke into a sardonic grin. So, we're peace negotiators now. Didn't see that coming. Me neither, Typhon admitted. But desperate times, right? They set off once more, the night wrapping around them like an indifferent cloak. Their path was fraught with the usual dangers, treacherous terrain, lurking predators, the ever-looming threat of discovery. But Typhon and Juno had long since made their peace with peril. It was the only consistent companion in a universe that seemed hellbent on killing them. As they approached the monastery, the distant sounds of conflict reached their ears, shouting, gunfire, the occasional explosion. The factions were still at each other's throats, oblivious to the puppet strings being woven around them. Think they'll listen? Juno asked, her tone skeptical enough to deflect a bullet. They'd better, Typhon replied. Otherwise, we'll have to find another cave to hide in. They arrived at the monastery's outskirts, the ancient stone seeming to groan in recognition. Typhon raised his compact device, sending out a signal that would override the chaotic frequencies currently filling the airwaves. Within moments, a hush fell over the battlefield, the silence as abrupt as it was unsettling. Heads turned, eyes narrowed, and the factions paused their bloody dance to listen. Attention, ladies, gentlemen, and assorted alien beings. Typhon's voice boomed, amplified by the device with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. We've got an offer you can't refuse. I feel like we should be wearing pinstripe suits, Juno muttered. Typhon ignored her, continuing his impromptu negotiation. The artifact you're so keen on destroying each other for, it's been disabled. We've got it and we're willing to deal. The silence stretched, tense and brittle, before finally shattering as voices rose in a cacophony of demands and threats. Not exactly the warmest reception, Juno noted. Wouldn't expect anything less, Typhon replied, undeterred. Bring your leaders to the monastery entrance. We'll talk terms. Reluctantly, the factions complied, representatives emerging from the shadows like children called to the principal's office. They approached with all the trust of a cat eyeing a suspiciously placed cucumber. The negotiations began, a back-and-forth dance of threats, bluster, and reluctant concessions. Typhon and Juno stood firm, presenting themselves as the only reasonable adults in a room full of squabbling toddlers. Listen, Typhon said, his voice carrying the weight of a man who had seen too much and lived to tell the tale. This artifact is a ticking time bomb. You can either work with us to ensure everyone benefits, or you can continue your little war and risk losing everything. The leaders exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them as they weighed the odds. Finally, grudgingly, they nodded. Fine, one of them said, a burly man with a scar running down his cheek like a misplaced map of regret. We'll talk, and talk they did, the negotiations stretching into the night as tempers flared and compromises were hammered out. It was a grueling process, the kind that left everyone involved feeling like they'd been run over by a particularly vindictive space freighter. But at the end of it all, peace was brokered. A fragile, tentative peace, but peace nonetheless. The factions agreed to share the artifact, to work together in understanding its mysteries without tearing each other apart in the process. Well, I'll be damned, Juno said, watching the leaders depart with the kind of satisfaction usually reserved for a well-cooked steak. We actually did it, Typhon shrugged, a weary smile playing across his lips. Guess even the universe gets tired of its own jokes sometimes. They stood in the monastery's shadow, the night air cool and crisp around them. The stars above continued their silent watch, indifferent to the drama unfolding below. But for Typhon and Juno, the galaxy felt just a little bit brighter, a little less hostile. What now? Juno asked, her voice carrying the weight of 1,000 unasked questions. Now, Typhon said, pocketing his device with a flourish, we take a break. A real one this time. Juno grinned, genuine and unguarded. Sounds like a plan. They walked away from the monastery, leaving the chaos and conflict behind. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while they faced it with hope. Think the universe will let us catch a break? Juno asked, a hint of laughter in her voice. Not a chance, Typhon replied, chuckling. But we've got each other, and that's something. And so they walked on, two defiant souls in a galaxy that had yet to break them. They didn't know what the future held, but they were ready to face it together, armed with nothing but their wits, their will, and a healthy dose of sarcasm. As they disappeared into the night, the stars twinkled above like a million indifferent eyes. And somewhere in that vast, uncaring expanse, the universe paused as if contemplating its next move. But for Typhon and Juno, the journey continued, their path lit by the faint glow of possibility. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it head-on, ready to laugh in the face of whatever absurdity the cosmos threw their way. And in a universe where chaos reigned supreme, that was more than enough. The universe has this way of giving you a brief respite before it kicks you in the teeth again. Typhon and Juno were no strangers to the cosmic boot, but tonight, as they trudged away from Monastery Calidus, there was a rare sense of accomplishment. It wasn't every day you got to play puppet master for squabbling factions and live to tell the tale. Think there's a medal for accidental diplomacy? Juno asked, her voice a mix of exhaustion and amusement. If there is, I'd wear it ironically, Typhon replied, kicking a loose stone aside. Then sell it to the highest bidder because, let's be honest, who needs a medal when you've got unpaid debts across 3 sectors? They walked in companionable silence, their steps crunching over the debris-strewn terrain. The night was alive with sounds, the distant calls of alien creatures, the rustle of wind through the dying trees, the occasional ominous creak from the ancient architecture they'd left in their wake. It was a symphony of impending doom, but then again, that was just background noise in their line of work. So, we've got this artifact, Juno said, jerking her thumb at the ominous weight in her pack. What's the plan? Pawn it and live on the run, or use it to buy a small moon somewhere? Neither, Typhon said, his tone unusually thoughtful. We've seen what this thing can do. Sell it and we're on every bounty hunter's wish list. Keep it and we might end up accidentally rearranging the solar system on a bad day. Fair point, Juno admitted. So, what then? Bury it in a nice garden plot and hope no one finds it, Typhon chuckled, a dry sound that hinted at 1,000 weary experiences. I was thinking maybe we could safeguard it. You know, make sure it's used for something better than blowing up planets or turning people into puddles of cosmic goo. Heroic of you, Juno said, smirking. Since when did you turn all altruistic? Since this thing almost made me a smear on a cave wall, he replied. Self-preservation can look a hell of a lot like heroism when you squint. As they moved further from the monastery, the lights faded into the distance, leaving behind only the dim glow of their handheld torches to pierce the darkness. It was a scene that would have terrified anyone with a shred of sense. Then again, Typhon and Juno had long ago traded sense for survival instincts and a twisted sense of humor. They reached a clearing, the grass underfoot damp with the promise of rain. The air was crisp, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and the distant tang of rust from the monastery's decaying structures. It wasn't home, but it was better than the alternative, being dead. Remember when we thought this was just going to be a routine salvage mission? Juno asked, her tone wistful. Yeah, back when we were young and stupid, Typhon said, grinning. Now we're just older and slightly less stupid. Juno laughed, a sound that was more disbelief than joy. You ever think about what we'd do if we didn't have these near-death experiences to fill our time? Get real jobs, Typhon suggested, a shudder running through his voice like a bad joke. Don't even joke about that, Juno retorted. I'd rather face an army of aliens than sit behind a desk. Point taken, Typhon acknowledged. But seriously, there's got to be more to life than dodging death and haggling over intergalactic scrap. Maybe there is, Juno agreed. But until we find it, we keep doing what we do best. And what's that? Typhon asked. Not dying, Juno replied with a crooked grin. They made camp under the stars, a makeshift affair that involved more patchwork and prayer than actual engineering. The fire crackled with the cheerful malevolence of something that knew it was a temporary reprieve from the encroaching night. It cast long shadows that danced over their faces, highlighting the grime and weariness etched into their skin. Juno leaned back against her pack, her gaze focused on the stars above. You ever wonder if there's more out there? You mean besides the endless void and hostile life forms? Typhon asked, raising an eyebrow. Yeah, like something better. Some kind of peace that isn't just the absence of war, she mused. Typhon considered the idea, the silence stretching between them like an old, comfortable coat. Maybe. But if there is, I doubt it's within reach. Not for people like us, cynic, Juno chided, though not without affection. Realist, Typhon countered. But hey, we've got a new goal, right? Make sure nobody uses these artifacts to do something monumentally stupid. Ambitious, Juno said, nodding. Reckon the universe will let us get away with it, it's got a twisted sense of humor, Typhon replied. But we've survived this long. That's got to count for something. And so, as the fire burned low and the night deepened, they planned for a future that was as uncertain as it was compelling. A future where their actions might just tip the scales away from destruction and toward something resembling progress. It was a long shot. But in a universe that thrived on chaos, long shots were their specialty. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, they extinguished the remnants of their fire and packed their meager belongings. The world was waking up around them, though it felt more like a reluctant yawn than a fresh start. Ready to face the day? Juno asked, fastening her pack with a determined tug. Doesn't matter if I'm ready, Typhon said, stretching his arms above his head. The day's coming whether we like it or not. They set off once more, the path forward still shrouded in uncertainty but illuminated by the glimmer of possibility. Their steps were steady, their resolve unshaken. Whatever lay ahead, they would meet it head-on, armed with nothing but their wits, their will, and a penchant for dark humor. And as they walked, the universe watched, an impartial spectator to their journey. It held its breath, waiting for the next chapter in the saga of two humans who refused to be anything other than themselves in a galaxy that demanded conformity. Typhon and Juno were many things, scavengers, survivors, occasional saviors. But above all, they were stubbornly, unrepentantly human. And in a cosmos that seemed intent on proving otherwise, that was a victory in itself. As the miles slipped away beneath their boots, they remained undeterred. Their path was far from clear, yet they walked it with the kind of stubborn determination that only humans seemed capable of. Think we'll ever find somewhere to settle down? Juno asked, her tone half mocking, half serious. Maybe, Typhon said, a hint of a smile on his lips. But I'm not holding my breath. You should have been a motivational speaker, Juno quipped. You couldn't afford me, Typhon shot back. And so they continued, two figures against the vastness of the universe, determined to carve out their own narrative amidst the chaos. It was a thankless task, but then again, they weren't doing it for thanks. They were doing it because they could, because they had to, because despite everything, they still believed in something better. The journey was far from over, but for now it was enough. And for Typhon and Juno, that was all that mattered.